I am thrilled to welcome you to tonight's event, and I'm deeply honored by the attendance tonight and the friends and colleagues in our midst. I'm of course aware that no one comes to a book launch to listen to a publisher speak, so I'm going to keep my comments concise. We've gathered here today, as you can tell from this rather splendid backdrop, to celebrate the publication of Changing India, which encapsulates Dr. Manmohan Singh's perspective on a wide range of economic, social, and political issues that transpired during his long, storied, and eventful career. These 5 books, 6 volumes spread across 5 books, provide a fitting and timely backdrop to present deliberations on India's evolving economic role on the world stage. They range far and wide, covering the period of economic liberalization and the 10 years of power of the United Progressive Alliance through the prism of Dr. Singh's selected writings, speeches, and interviews, including his perspective on an array of themes covering trade and development, economic reforms, the quest for social equality, and India's place in the world. Dr. Singh, who was named one of Time magazine's most influential people in the world, is an extreme example of the successful practitioner academic. Academia, in my experience, tends to prize a particular form of intelligence, an analytical, methodologically distinct, and rigorous worldview that is often addressed primarily to an audience of one's peers who breathe the same rarefied air that one does, but too often venture only infrequently into extra-academic climates. Dr. Singh's career speaks to the ways in which that particular form of learning can most effectively be broadcast more widely outside the realm of the ivory tower, to influence policy and to ground government action in empiricism, in evidence-based information, in reason, and in data. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude, first of all, to Dr. Singh himself for publishing these works with us, and also to the editors of the respective volumes. Dr. C. Rangarajan, the former governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Dr. K. Sundaram, chairman of the Advisory Committee on National Account Statistics in the Central Statistical Organization of the Government of India, Lord Nicholas Stern, chair of the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the LSE, the London School of Economics in the UK, Mr. Shantanu Singh, research fellow with the Suntory and Toyota International Centers for Economics and Related Disciplines at the India Observatory of the LSE, and Dr. Rudrangshu Mukherjee, professor of history and the chancellor of Ashoka University, for their invaluable contributions in making these volumes come to life, which involved an enormous amount of editorial work and editing and curation. Oxford University Press is, as you may know, a department of the University of Oxford, and it is the largest university press in the world. We publish in 102 languages, and our wares are available in almost all of the world's countries. We've been in India now for over 106 years, and I take particular pleasure in the fact that the press is now offering knowledge resources in both Hindi and Bangla. Available in both print and digital forms, these books are a tribute to the nation's multilingual and cosmopolitan complexity and provide a critical advantage to an audience whose primary language is not English. This evening is, in fact, an extension of our organizational mission of furthering excellence in research, scholarship, and education by publishing worldwide. And after all, Volume 1 of the set found its origins in Dr. Singh's PhD dissertation at Nuffield College in Oxford in 1964. So it does seem appropriate in a full circle sort of way that OUP should be the publisher. We are delighted that so many of you have taken time from your busy schedules to join us tonight, and I'm looking forward to hearing the event. So I'm going to keep to my word and stop speaking, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Nico. I would now like to welcome Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee, who is the editor of the volume. Rudrangshu Mukherjee is Professor of History and the Chancellor of Ashoka University, Sonipat, of which he was also the founding Vice Chancellor. Professor Mukherjee.
Dr. Singh, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Plato dreamt somewhere of a philosopher king, a ruler who would be driven by his thirst for knowledge, but also be intelligent enough to negotiate the lanes of statecraft and ruling over people. That was a dream. As far as I know, no one has ever written of or dreamt of a scholar prime minister. India had the enormous good fortune in having achievements, his scholarship as well as his prime ministership. The 4 volumes, the first 4 volumes, they bring together the works of an outstanding economist who had the Adam Smith Gold Prize, Gold Medal from St. John's, Cambridge, then had the Senior Research Fellowship at Nuffield, where he completed his PhD work, which is the first DPhil work, which is the first volume of this series. And then it goes on, the other volumes discuss very grave economic matters on which I'm sure the other editors will speak, and they have a greater authority to speak on those subjects, like trade, export subsidies, self-sustained growth, and liberalizing the Indian economy. It was my rare privilege to edit volume 5, which is called The Prime Minister Speaks. When I saw the material of how much Manmohan Singh had spoken as Prime Minister, the first thing that struck me was the irony that he had actually been called a silent prime minister by some of his ignorant critics. The other thing, apart from the quantity of what he had said and spoken, was the quality of it. As all of you know, this is nothing new to say, Manmohan Singh is not a rabble-rousing quality that many politicians in India seem to cultivate and enjoy. I found trying to cultivate and introduce into Indian politics a different tenor, a different register, and a different kind of political discourse where persuasion through logic and reasoning had precedence over raucous rabble-rousing. And when you read the 5th volume, which I edited, you will find that this is the quality that comes through. And I think if India is to grow, and she is sure to grow and develop, this is the way that politics will have to go. This is the way of the new political language and the new political discourse. The political theorist Rousseau once wrote that the real leader of the Commonwealth is somebody who plants in the present and reaps in the future. I believe in more ways than Dr. Manmohan Singh will care to admit, he has planted for the future. This will be his enduring legacy to Indians, for which all of us are very deeply grateful to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee, for your very insightful remarks. May I now request Professor K. Sundaram to grace us with his insights. Professor Sundaram is chairman of the Advisory Committee on National Account Statistics, Central Statistical Organization, Government of India, and is the former member of the expert group to review the methodology for measurement of poverty, Planning Commission, Government of India. Sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Manmohan Singh, and ladies and gentlemen. It has been my pleasure and in fact a great privilege to edit this volume and offer a selection of Professor Manmohan Singh's papers of the 1980s. I would like to thank Professor Singh and of course the Oxford University Press for this opportunity. This volume is organized in 3 sections. The first one is on the international economic order. The prospects of world trade and capital flows and response in terms of development strategy and policy is a central theme running through many papers in this volume. These are brought together in the first section of this volume, the international economic order. Very interestingly, all the papers in this section offer a broadly similar, I'm afraid largely pessimistic assessment of the outlook for trade and capital flows for the developing countries in the early 80s. And in fact, this assessment continues through assessments in mid-80s as also the late 80s. What I found most interesting is that even against this backdrop of slowdown in growth of world trade then, Professor Singh cautions against undue export pessimism that had in fact shaped our policies in the 60s and earlier, which he had studied in the full dissertation, that is volume 1 of this section. He in fact prefers domestic policies to create an environment conducive to the realization of our export potential. But he's very careful to add that this is not to be confused with the adoption of an export-led growth strategy. The common theme uniting rest of the papers is the quest for equity in development, which remains central to Dr. Singh's idea of the very study of economic development. In the second section of this volume on development and public policy is the deceptively titled On the Credit Policy of the Reserve Bank of India. It offers very much more. In fact, it argues the imperatives of a significant rise in the rate of growth and concomitantly in the rate of investment, both as a means of increasing our capital stock and as a means of introducing and absorbing new technology. This leads him, because of the attendant political and economic risks, that that the dependence on external resources is best contained, and therefore stepping up of domestic savings is seen as the key focus of public policy. This is a very rich paper in itself, but what I found most interesting is that this paper offers one of his earliest and arguably the best articulation of the case for a major focus of public policy on equity in development, and equally striking is the focus on provision of public policy on the provision of adequate and equitable distribution of social services such as health and education. I think this is one of the earliest, as far as I can see, focus on education and education and health, public provision as a step for greater equity. You know, this volume is so rich in many dimensions. But what I would like to suggest is that, you know, there are bits in the paper on planning and markets that offers sort of foretaste of the reforms of the early 1990s. For instance, on the issue of regulation of private investment, Dr. Singh is very clear. As the economy becomes more complex, it is much better to have a negative list of industries and locations which the authorities seek to discourage for the purposes of investment. So clearly, your industrial licensing reforms are presaged as far as back as 1982. On the broader issue of on the role of markets, which is one of the papers in this, it is clear, for Dr. Singh is clear, that given the prevailing inequalities of income and wealth and the large externalities associated with the provision of basic social services, one cannot depend, as presumably he meant to say, not entirely on the market forces to secure a balanced and equitable access to these services for all of our citizens. The final section begins with Dr. Singh's Kale Memorial Lecture, titled The Quest for Equity in Development, which also is one of the components of the title of this volume. Removal of poverty, together with a progressive reduction in inequalities, is central to the pursuit of social justice, which, along with equal opportunities for all, defined for him the very idea of equity. The instrumentalities for achieving this social justice is essentially high economic growth, which is linked to the labor market outcomes in terms of both greater absorption of labor and or higher real wage rates. This theme of, again, he is focusing attention here on improving the access of the underprivileged to basic social services, particularly educational. This is a recurring theme in this volume. Dr. Singh's prescription is to so orient the growth process that primacy is given to satisfaction of basic human needs. Equally significant is his emphasis on equality of opportunity to all its citizens and the removal of barriers to social mobility. To my mind, this conception of social justice in many ways mirrors the concept of equity articulated by Sitowski as early as 1960s. The other papers in this volume also offer to the reader a number of rich insights and perspectives on a range of policies and performance of the Indian economy in the pursuit of equity in development. Indeed, a very rich fare is on offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sundaram, for your brilliant comments. May I now invite Mr. Shantanu Singh for sharing with us his experiences into the making of the volume. Mr. Singh is Research Fellow with the Santini and Toyota International Centres for Economics and Related Disciplines, India Observatory at the London School of Economics, UK. Mr. Singh.
Right, thank you for that introduction. I would like to start by extending a very warm congratulations to Dr. Singh and his family on this very important day, and also to the OUP for successfully compiling this very valuable series of books. I am here to speak for both Nick, Professor Nick Stern, and myself. Nick has a video that we'll play after this. But I can very proudly say for both of us that it's been an absolute honor and a privilege to be able to put this volume together. I would go so far as to say that we've got the meatiest bits, because the 1990s were definitely the part where Dr. Singh's ideologies unfolded and truly changed the shape of this country. Going through the speeches and the writings through the 90s, for me it was like stepping back into history, and at a point where India was going to change, for the better. Nick is going to be introducing the book in more detail, but I just want to highlight two things that really stood out when we were making this volume and when we were putting it together. The first is the recurring theme. So there's three themes around which we've sort of laid the book out. The first is liberalization and modernization, social justice and equity, and a framework of fair international governance. Now, these three topics are recurring themes in all the papers that we went through. But it's important to note, I think as Professor K. Sundaram just said, that the only thing that is truly sort of centered in these papers is the focus on social justice and equity. For everything else, what we see is that Dr. Singh was not ideologically committed to any way. What he was doing was responding to the situations and the urgencies of the world at that time, using his deep knowledge and the wealth of experience that he had accumulated. These three themes provide us a very rich lens through which we compiled and organized all of your works through the decade. The other thing that I think is important to highlight here is Dr. Singh's unwavering commitment to his nation. For me, there's one quotation from the volume, which I'm sure will resonate with other readers as well. It was particularly resonant with me. With respect to the program of economic reforms, Dr. Singh says, and I quote, "I was left in no doubt that I would be the scapegoat if the program failed. I was prepared to accept that challenge." Now, I think that to be willing to put your personal reputation and legacy at stake for the greater good, I can think of no greater hallmark of patriotism than this. So, you know, I'm really glad to have had the opportunity to work on these writings. In today's times, when discourse and opinions are often divorced from facts, I think volumes such as these are an important contribution in enabling access to the principles, thoughts, and ideas of great leaders, including in our case, a great man whose life has been very closely linked to that of his country. I wish him and his family a great day of celebration today. And with that, I hope we can introduce Professor Stern's video now. Yeah? Thank you very much.
Dear Manmohan, warmest congratulations to you and your wonderful family on this very special day of the publication of your speeches and your writings over your long and illustrious career. Thank you so much to your family for working so hard to make this happen, and to Oxford University Press, India. And thank also to my collaborator on the work of editing the volume for the 1990s, Shantanu Singh. Manmohan, please let me start on a very personal note. We met in the early 1970s, and you were instrumental in my coming to India in 1974, initially to work on one Indian village in UP, which had been studied before and which we have been studying ever since. Without you and our mutual friend T.N. Srinivasan, who sadly we recently lost, that would not have happened, and that changed my life. I've been working on and in India, including on and in Palanpur, since 1974. And I'm enormously grateful to you, Manmohan, for making that happen. But also the great personal friendship and the warmth and the guidance and the wisdom that you've offered to me throughout that time. So thank you very much, Manmohan, for all that friendship and guidance. The work that we report on here is, of course, your writings and your speeches and your academic and intellectual leadership. But you have been the finest of men, not only in the conceiving of ideas, but in carrying them through in such a steadfast, honourable and resilient way. And that is an enormous contribution to the history and the future of India and of the world. But today we celebrate the speeches and the writings and your leadership as a thinker on the economics of development, on the economics of policy, and on how to implement good policies. So let me say a little bit about how Shantanu Singh and I organised your writings during the 1990s. It was a special privilege to be involved in this project, particularly as a foreigner, although I hope a foreigner who is deeply devoted to India. But it was a special privilege to be allocated the 1990s, which were the special years of reforms, which changed India so profoundly. You conceived those reforms, you worked them out what they really meant, and you carried them through in a strong way. So let me talk about the broad areas that we have used in organising your work, and it illustrates the depth and power and breadth of your thinking. The first part of the story was development policy, and there you brought your tough analytical skills, your understanding of what it meant to modernise and liberalise and reform. You brought all that together with a deep practical knowledge of what could work and a deep commitment to equity and justice. So your writings on development policy in that spirit and how to make it happen are of profound importance. Secondly, we looked at your budgets, and your budget speeches are landmarks in terms of the economics of policy, particularly, if I may say, those earlier speeches about reforms, where the philosophy was set out, the sense of purpose, along with the practical measures that were implemented. The third part of the writings, as we organised it, were about global issues. You started out as a real scholar on international trade, and you stayed through your intellectual and political and practical life committed to a just and open global system. And you spoke with such authority on that, and I think it's particularly relevant for these special times when internationalism is under threat. The world could learn a great deal from going back and looking at your ideas on how to build an equitable, open global order. You spoke, and this is the next part of our discussion on how we divided up your contributions, about population and the workforce. You were very sensitive to India's growing population, very sensitive to productive work, very sensitive to the equity issues and the gender issues, and your writings on population and the workforce are extremely important. The next area, the fifth of our 6 categories, were democracy and pluralism. India is, of course, and it's profoundly important, a very diverse country, and you spoke with and wrote with deep insight on the challenges of building a pluralistic democracy. And again, I feel in these times where populism is growing in importance in some parts of the world, that your thoughts on democracy and pluralism are of profound importance. And finally, you wrote on, this is our 6th part of the volume as we organised it, science, agriculture and the environment, where your commitment to bringing the best of analytical work, whether it be on science or environment or agriculture, to the centre of policy making was extremely important. So Manmohan, that range of 6 broad areas illustrates just how deep and profound your thoughts have been over the years. I've learnt a lot from doing this work. I'm sure Shantanu has as well. And I hope that these 6 areas illustrate so clearly just how much you have contributed. It was a pleasure and a privilege to be involved in this project. Thank you very much, Manmohan, and I hope you have a splendid day celebrating, as we all should, this very special publication.
Unfortunately, one of the editors of the volume, Professor C. Rangarajan, is not with us today. He is a leading economist who has played a key role both as an academic and as a policymaker. He has held several important positions, including that of the Governor of RBI, Chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, Governor of Andhra Pradesh, as well as the Chairman of the 12th Finance Commission. However, he has sent a very special video address for all of us.
Dr. Manmohan Singh and friends, greetings to all of you. I miss being with you all on this happy occasion. Dr. Manmohan Singh is one of India's outstanding economists. It was also our good fortune that we had him as the head of government to steer the country for 10 years. Whatever position he held, Dr. Manmohan Singh at heart was an academic. All his writings and speeches reflect this. The volume that I have edited contains 17 select articles authored by Dr. Singh between 1957 and 1977. A major part of this period was spent by Dr. Singh in the academia. In 1971, he joined the Government of India and continued to serve the government in various capacities. The essays in this volume fall into three parts: trade, development, and monetary policy. All the articles stand by themselves. Each article is a model of clarity. In well-chiseled prose, Dr. Singh conveys his ideas in a systematic and logical way, which enables the readers to absorb his ideas easily. There are 7 essays included under the section Trade. Trade policy is closest to the heart of Dr. Singh. His doctoral thesis, later published under the title India's Export Trends and Prospects for Self-Sustained Growth, and now included in the 6-volume series, has become a classic in this area. Dr. Singh recognizes that import needs increase rapidly in the early stages of economic development. On the other hand, exports from developing economies face many obstacles. The elasticity of demand for the traditional exports is low. Besides, technology finds synthetic substitutes for some of the traditional exports. On the relative merits of export promotion and import substitution, he writes, and I quote, "The decision regarding the relative emphasis to be placed on import substitution as opposed to export promotion must be made after a careful analysis of respective costs and benefits." He goes on to emphasize that developing countries must take full advantage of the opportunities to improve productivity of investment through foreign trade. On devaluation, Dr. Singh argued that it was not a substitute for import controls, as import controls, in his view, fulfilled objectives which went beyond restricting imports. Nevertheless, he concluded in 1963, and I quote, "My own feeling is that India will soon have to give a serious consideration to a change in the present value of the rupee." He stressed that devaluation to be effective would require a deliberate restraint on domestic absorption of exportables. The section on development contains 7 articles. The first 2 articles under this section deal with the appropriate international environment that will assist the developing economies to grow faster. In this context, Dr. Singh discusses issues relating to foreign trade and foreign capital. Dr. Singh's review of the book by Bhagwati and Desai clearly brings out where he stood on industrial policy. He commends the authors for the comprehensive analysis of the instruments of control that had been adopted in India to promote industrial development. While agreeing with the authors that the system of direct controls as operated in India had many wasteful features, he did not think that by itself was a convincing evidence that the country would necessarily have been better off under a different system. He did agree that there was a need for a rethink on the instruments of control, but he was not convinced that an efficient framework is always one based on the principles of economic liberalism. At that point in time, Dr. Singh stood in favor of physical controls rather than price mechanism for achieving efficiency in the allocation of resources. The last and third section deals with monetary policy. The most interesting piece in this section is monetary policy and economic expansion. His conclusion is strong and is well summed up in the last para, and I quote, "What we need in this country is a maximum stimulus being given to productive investment in the economy is to become self-generating at an early date. This will require provision of adequate credit at low enough rates of interest to the deserving borrowers." He did not envisage the possibility that public investment might be pushed by excessive resort to deficit financing. In fact, in the 1970s and 80s, RBI had to wrestle with excessive liquidity caused by the monetization of fiscal deficit. As governor, he had to face this phenomenon of high monetary growth and take action. Dr. Manmohan Singh has not only been a leading economist of the country, but also an important policy maker. The articles included in this volume provide an excellent commentary on the evolving thought on economic development. While the views expressed by Dr. Singh were broadly in line with the dominant view prevailing among policymakers at that time, in some important ways, he also differed from others. For example, while he supported import controls, he distanced himself from export pessimism and advocated strong action for promoting exports. On some critical issues, such as licensing and controls, he has changed his views subsequently. That is a hallmark of an active mind which responds creatively to the changing circumstances. Thank you very much.
Professor Kaushik Basu was the chief economist of World Bank from 2012 to 2016, and he's a C. Marks Professor of International Studies and Professor of Economics at Cornell University. Dr. Manmohan Singh, the star of the evening, needs no introduction at all. I would now like to welcome Professor Basu and Dr. Singh to formally release the set and request the editors and Nico to join them on stage. The release will be followed by a conversation between Professor Basu and Dr. Singh, a part of the evening that we all have been eagerly waiting for. Thank you.
Dr. Manmohan Singh, Mrs. Singh, distinguished members of the audience gathering. I can't tell you how much pleasure it gives me to be here on this occasion of the book launch for Dr. Singh. Actually, I came to Delhi precisely for this event. Welcome all of you. I was told when Oxford University Press first phoned me, it'll be 5 volumes. So I had told them that keep them waiting for me in Delhi. I'll come, I'll flip through, get a bit of familiarity. I knew his work earlier. Then I get the shock of my life to see the size of these 5 volumes. One of those is actually 2 volumes, so that's 6. And one of those half is more than 800 pages. So effectively, it's a 10-volume set which has come out. And as Rudrangshu said earlier, that the criticism that he was a silent prime minister, didn't speak very much, he's hit out now with a whammy of the production of what he did during this period. And congratulations to Oxford University Press also for producing a very handsome set of books over here. It was his leadership that made my own 3 years, nearly 3 years that I spent in government, a very, very special occasion. The sheer professionalism that went into discussions on economic policies. I remember several occasions when I would meet with Dr. Singh, and I would come out and the press would ask me questions thinking that it was some discussion of some political intrigue or such matters. I think they would be very disappointed to hear that each time it would be sheer professional matters, something to do with the Indian economy that would occupy our time almost entirely. And this had a reflection in terms of what was happening in India. Some of those discussions I've written subsequently were absolutely first-rate. People with whom the team that would be involved in discussing economics, there's Jairam Ramesh over here, Montek Singh Aluwalia, and I can tell you I had these names here before I knew that they would be in the audience. The sheer quality was just magnificent. The issues that were being discussed, that were being brought to the table, and a lot of this really did get reflected in terms of the way the Indian economy was performing. The example of professionalism that was there, I remember very early after I joined government, and I had been already interacting with Dr. Singh, a journalist came and asked me questions about Indian inflation. You will remember that that was a period with high inflation. That was a very major concern. And I gave my short analysis of what was happening, including some forecasts. When the journalist said that, do you realize that you're actually contradicting the Prime Minister's forecast and analysis? To which I responded that if the Prime Minister wanted a serious advisor who would then say exactly what the Prime Minister wants to say and repeat the same lines, he could do without the advisor. And that was India. Bringing the best ideas to the table, you knew that there would be occasional contradictions, but when the ideas are being presented with sincerity, there was space for that to be presented. I believe history will indeed judge Dr. Manmohan Singh as one of the finest political leaders anywhere in the world. And you can see that in the record of how India has performed. It's the unleashing of energy, first of all. In 1991 to 1993, the reforms played a very major role. Even later, the big growth spurt, 2005 to 2008. 2008, you will remember, is the Lehman crisis, the massive global crisis. Things did slow down. 2005 to 2008, and in fairness, it actually picked up in 2003, the growth. Picked up even more in 2005, and it was a 7-8 years of remarkable performance. I mean, India's growth rate as roughly 8.5% per annum over a stretch of time like that had not happened before, has not happened since then. So it was remarkable for the country. Critics often said he was not strong enough on many matters. I feel people make a mistake that people often associate strength with the schoolyard bully. You can very easily appear strong by being the schoolyard bully, but it's much more difficult to be strong in your quiet way, and despite getting criticism, to continue in that way. So in many ways, I think he was among the strongest leaders that has been there in the country. I must also, I don't want to embarrass him, but I do want to mention that he brought a certain level of moral courage to politics, which is absolutely rare. He is a person of Kantian morality. He brought that to politics. It's rare to have a person like that as a leader. And I really now, I don't work for the government, but when I look back, I feel it was a proud moment for the country, even globally, recognition of a leader of this kind. There is a bit of a paradox. Usually, a person with these traits, this kind of lack of political intrigue, plain simple moral courage, such people don't reach the level of the Prime Minister of a country. So it is unusual. I do have to say that Mrs. Gandhi, Sonia Gandhi, gets credit also for talent spotting, for enabling someone who is not a natural politician, and I say this as a praise, but reached a position where he could influence the country's direction. So it's been a remarkable phase in the country, and I think it will be recognized in the long run as such. Now, about the books. We talked briefly, and I told him that I will not push him to say too many things, but still, I do want to get into the books a little bit. It's a remarkable set of work. I knew a lot of the work earlier. I have to say that this particular collection, I have not gone through, but I knew many of the papers and the works earlier. It begins with his PhD thesis. The PhD thesis that was done at Oxford. I knew that IMD Little was the examiner. What I did not know is that John Hicks was IMD Little was the PhD advisor, but Hicks was the examiner, which I did not know earlier. And Hicks, as for the non-economists, is one of the greatest economists of our time, maybe among the 3-4 most distinguished economists in the world over the last 100 years. So it was Hicks, and it was Hicks who recommended that the PhD thesis be published as a Clarendon University press. On trade and exports, the book is quite remarkable, the PhD, because nowadays there is a lot of work which is described as big data analysis. You have computers which will take in massive amounts of data, ingest, analyze the data, and spew out results. The thesis is actually an example of as much of data analysis as was possible in the pre-computer days, and it's quite amazing. It collects a huge amount of data, and with the ifs and buts, economic analysis has open-ended positions that you have to take on many matters, and the book is modest enough to point out that on many matters we do not know, we are seeking the best answers. So I would like to, Dr. Singh, ask 2 questions from this period. The first one is actually a slightly personal question. I want to know your experience growing up in India, started out in rural India, then of course you moved to Chandigarh, going to Oxford and Cambridge. Was there a bit of a culture shock? Did you adjust very easily? Was your academic concern so great that you did not worry about that? I would like to know that personal element of adjusting to this new world. And then I have a question about the line that you take on export promotion at that time. Did you change your mind on many of these matters? By the time 1991 comes in, you're the finance minister, you have to take decisions on these. Should we pull it forward? Yeah. I think that should.
Thank you very much, Professor Kaushik Basu. It's a real privilege to be sitting on this table in your company, because your own contribution to economic thought and processes are something which need to be written in words of gold. So it's a real pleasure having you with us today. These volumes represent my lifetime work, and those who want to know what I thought in these nearly 62 periods of my life, which are covered in this volume, can have this reference volume as a benchmark for future analysis and appraisal, whether what I did was right or wrong, that history will tell. But for me, the Oxford University Press has done me the honor of publishing these really 6 volumes, and the fact that Rudranshu Mukherjee has handled the work relating to my period as a Prime Minister of India is a real privilege, because his critical insights I have always admired as editor of the Telegraph and later on as Chancellor of Ashoka University. He is a remarkable human being. You have asked me this question, what did I find when I moved to Cambridge? I was introduced to Cambridge by one of my teachers in Hoshiarpur, where I studied for my MA, and that was Dr. S.P. Rangnekar. And he encouraged me to think of going to Oxford or Cambridge, but he preferred Cambridge because he was himself a Cambridge man. And so I was tempted to go for studies at Cambridge. I didn't feel any experienced or didn't experience any culture shocks. Although there were people, I was one of the few Sikhs with a turban on, and people used to ask me the question, why do you wear this turban? But in dealings with my teachers, I had no problems. And in fact, I had as my teachers some of the greatest economists of the world, John Robinson, Professor Nicholas Caldor, Sir Dennis Robertson, Piero Sraffa. So sitting at their feet was itself a great educational experience. And when I did my tripos, I was the only first of that year. So the Cambridge University awarded me the Renbury Scholarship to do research. But before that, in 1956, I was awarded the Adam Smith Prize by the University of Cambridge. So this was an inducement for me to go ahead with research. But I had a scholarship from Punjab University. The Punjab University, I had a contract that when I come back, the money that the Punjab University had spent on me, either I would have to serve them for 3 years or that money will have to be returned to the university. I came back to India hoping to serve the Punjab University, but at that time, Mr. T.T. Krishnamachari was the finance minister and Mr. H.M. Patel was the principal finance secretary. At that time, Professor Nicholas Caldor wrote to T.T. Krishnamachari, who was a great friend of Professor Nicholas Caldor, and Caldor said, Krishna, I have a student who is ideally suited for the treasury. But I did not join the government of India then because the Vice Chancellor of Punjab University said, gentlemen, if you want to desert us, you better return all the money that we have spent on you. And I didn't have the money, honestly. So I stayed on in the Punjab University for 3 years. In the meanwhile, Nuffield College elected me to a fellowship. And when I completed my 3 years, I went back to Oxford to do my PhD on export trends and prospects of self-sustained growth, which in those days was one of the first few serious-minded work which explored the dimensions of trade policies as instruments of economic and social development. And there I was examined by Sir John Hicks. Sir John Hicks was impressed with my work, and he said, "What are you planning to do?" I said, "I'm going back to India." But he said, "What are you going to do to publish your work?" I said, "I don't know any publishers." And he said, "I am the trustee of Clarendon Press. I will ensure that the Clarendon Press publishes your work." And that's where my first book came out, as the book which was produced by the Clarendon Press in 1964. And so I didn't feel any culture shock, but it was a great educational experience. I sat at the feet of some of the greatest economists of the world, and I learned a great deal, both at Cambridge and Oxford. And the purpose of my stay was not to stay away from India. I was always in the mind that my ultimate place is in India, that sooner I get back to our country, the better it would be for my own growth, and I hope that's part of my contribution in a small way to the development of our country. So that's where I came from, a small village in West Punjab, where there was no electricity, where there was no secure water supply. There was only a primary school, which was also at a distance. And I studied until the 4th class in that school. In the 5th grade, I migrated to Chakwal, which was the Tehsil headquarters of Punjab. There my uncle was posted, and I stayed with him. And in the 6th class, I went to Peshawar, where my father was posted. And from 6th to 10th class, I studied in a school in Peshawar. My examination results for matriculation examination took place in Peshawar. But in the meanwhile, partition came, and the result was that the results of the March 47 matriculation examination were never declared. And therefore, when we migrated to India, I had to repeat the matriculation examination once again in Delhi in 1948. So life has been a great adventure and an enterprise which I relished. I have no regrets. I honestly believe that the country has been enormously kind to me, and this is a debt I will never be able to repay to our great country that India is.
Dr. Singh rarely talks about personal matters, but now that he's done it, I want to push him a little bit more. Was there a culture shock? You're going into politics. I mean, you were a scholar. You were in Delhi School of Economics when Delhi School of Economics was really at its prime. And you were also an advisor playing a non-political role. Was there a culture shock going into politics?
Well, there was a culture shock, yes and no. I came to the government in 1971, and I stayed on in the government till 87, when I left the Planning Commission as Deputy Chairman to go and work with Professor Julius Nyerere as Secretary General of the South-South Commission. I had not been in politics, but I had worked with politicians in all these years. In 71, then I started my career in the Ministry of Foreign Trade. From foreign trade, I moved to finance, and that too also under peculiar circumstances. I worked in the Ministry of Foreign Trade for 1 year. I was not satisfied with the environment that prevailed. There was too little emphasis on serious analytical work and too much of politicking. So I resigned from the ministry. Mr. P.N. Haksar was then the principal secretary to the Prime Minister. He called me and he said, "We are not going to let you go back to Delhi School of Economics. And if whatever your grievance, we will make sure that you are promoted and made chief economic advisor to the government." And there was a vacancy, and therefore I became the chief economic advisor to the government of India in 1972 as chief economic advisor. In 72, I came to the Ministry of Finance, and in a short period of time, there was elections in 1971 and 72, state elections. Mr. P.N. Haksar asked me, "What do you think we should be doing?" And there is one paper which is missing in this that I wrote at that time, "Victory, What to Do with It." And in that paper that I wrote, I said the victory of the Congress party in the elections in 1971 and 72 is a rare occasion to use politics as an instrument of economic and social change. And I outlined a broad strategy. One of the two papers, I believe Jairam Ramesh has been able to dig out, but this basic paper, What to Do with Victory, is somehow not available, and that's not included here. But that was my first big introduction to the world of politics. I worked very closely with Shri Y.B. Chavan, and through Mr. P.N. Haksar, I had ample opportunities to interact with the then Prime Minister, Srimati Indira Gandhi. People say she was very haughty. My experience of dealing with Indira ji was she was always very receptive to new ideas, and particularly technological thought processes where she herself said that she was not very knowledgeable. She listened to expert advice in depth. In 73, the country was in the midst of a 30% inflation rate, and Mrs. Gandhi in Bangalore made a speech that we need a man who is a great expertise to solve the inflation problem that was hurting the country. And when she came back, there was a cabinet meeting, and she asked me what were my thoughts about the control of inflation. And I said, "Madam, my feeling is if we learn to convert good economics into good politics, that would be the first essential thing for controlling inflation." And then Mrs. Gandhi said, "What exactly do you mean?" She turned to Mr. Pandey, who was the cabinet secretary, and she said I should work with the cabinet secretary and Professor P.N. Dhar to produce a paper, which I did produce, and the government made use of that paper to outline an inflation control strategy. That's how I made my name with Indira ji. She was so impressed, and that's where Mr. P.N. Haksar helped me to make my mark in the Ministry of Finance. I worked very closely with Sri C. Subramaniam, and as Finance Minister, Mr. C. Subramaniam was a usually unorthodox man. Never before a finance minister at the budget time thought of producing a paper on strategies for rural development. C. Subramaniam said we should do that. In the Ministry of Finance, there was a lot of people who said, no, this is not done, this is not our terrain, but we went ahead, and that paper itself was a very influential paper in outlining new way of thinking about rural and agricultural development. In the 70s, inflation control and the management of the balance of payments in the wake of the first oil crisis were the most important policy issues with which I was deeply involved. And then came the emergency. I was appointed secretary to the Ministry of Finance by Indiraji. When the emergency was over, there was pressure on Morajibai that I should be removed because I was too close to Indiraji. But Mr. H.M. Patel, who was the finance minister, he remembered the letter that Nicholas Caldor had written to T.T. Krishnamachari. And he said, no, Prime Minister, I know Manmohan Singh for a long time, and he will be able to work with us without any difficulties. And the result was that I was one of the few secretaries in the government of India who kept his job despite change of government. When Mrs. Gandhi came back, she again called me the day she was making a speech to the nation and showed me a draft. And in that speech, there were some things which I felt were not correct. And one of these was that the Janta government had made a mess of the foreign exchange situation. I pointed out to the Prime Minister that, Madam, you may have other grievances, but the Janta government has left you with a hefty foreign exchange situation. And therefore, she, in her own hand, made corrections in this speech. Such was the greatness of the Prime Minister that she did not discourage free thinking, provided one had no axe to grind. And I had the privilege of working with Indiraji, and when she came back, she said, I should go to the Planning Commission. Mr. T.N. Kaul was then close to Indiraji. He suggested that I should become the Planning Commission Minister. I was called by Indiraji, and I said, Madam, I cannot afford to lose my job because I have no pension, and if you send me to the Planning Commission as minister or as deputy chairman, I will have to resign from the civil service. And that would mean that I would lose pension. So Mrs. Gandhi said, well, so what is the way out? I suggested perhaps I could go to the Planning Commission as member secretary. And that's where the then cabinet secretary said no, nothing doing, because the cabinet secretary used to be the principal secretary of the Planning Commission also. And therefore, the then cabinet secretary opposed. But Mrs. Gandhi was so clear in her mind that then she said to the cabinet secretary, well, you are raising issues, but we are not writing the Constitution of India or amending the Constitution. If the rules do not allow, the rules can be amended to make Manmohan Singh as the member secretary. And that's how I became the first member secretary of the Planning Commission. So I have worked with politicians. So when Narasimha called me in May or June 91, I was not totally alien to working with the politician. But I was told I was not the first choice of Narasimha for the finance minister job. Probably the job was offered to Dr. I.G. Patel, who was a great friend of mine and a great economist. He somehow declined, and therefore Mr. Pianhak, Dr. Alexander, who was advising the Prime Minister, he said I should be approached for the finance minister's job. So Dr. Alexander came and saw me. I had just come back from Holland. I was sleeping. So my wife said, I cannot be disturbed. But Dr. Alexander said, well, it's urgent. And therefore, he came and told me that this is what the Prime Minister was thinking. I was then the chairman of the University Grants Commission. And next morning, I went to the office as usual. Narasimha was searching for me, and he traced me to the UGC, and he said, where are you? I said, I am in the UGC. He said, hasn't Dr. Alexander mentioned to you what we have for you? I said, I didn't take him very seriously. And Narasimha said, no, you go and get dressed up and come for the swearing-in ceremony. So that's how I became the finance minister. So people say I was accidental prime minister. I was also accidental finance minister. And Narasimha called me and I met him. I said to him that the country is in great difficulties. It requires hard thinking and very tough decision-making process to get the country out of the crisis that she was in. Narasimha said, I don't understand all this, but we will give you a free hand with the understanding that if the things go well, we will all take credit. But if the things go wrong, well, you will be the scapegoat. I said, I accept that, but you will have to back me. And Narasimha did back me on every stage. In fact, we changed the rules of the game. Previously, issues like devaluation were never discussed between the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister alone. I told Narasimha that if you take this matter to the cabinet, it will never pass the cabinet. Because I was aware of the fact that in 1964, when the issue of devaluation came up in the government of India, 3 years were lost in debating whether we should devalue or not. But Narasimha was so graceful. He said, we will do away with the cabinet approval. You write a handwritten note, and I will endorse it, and that's enough. And that's how things worked out. I still have that handwritten note where Narasimha signed saying we can go ahead with devaluation without going to the cabinet. Now, that was an unusual thing for the Prime Minister, but Narasimha backed me. But there were times when he also developed nervousness, and the then President of India, Mr. Venkataraman, was not in favor of devaluing the rupee. And he called me and he said, you are planning to do this, but you are a government which doesn't have a majority, which does not have the support of the majority in parliament, and therefore you should not go this way till you have earned the vote of confidence. I told the President, Mr. President, if you want me to wait till we have sought the vote of confidence, there will be nothing to seek the vote for. In the meanwhile, the foreign exchange reserves had nearly disappeared, and our reserves were no more than 2 weeks. We couldn't last more than 2 weeks, and therefore I told the President that we have to go ahead, and therefore Narasimha Rao ji allowed me to go ahead. But we devised a strategy that there would be two-stage devaluation. I wanted to test the waters, what would be the country's reaction. So first dose was a mild one, but second dose was a tougher dose. But some people advised Narasimha Rao ji that this would be bad for the country, and he, in the morning when the second dose was to be implemented, it turned out that Narasimha Rao ji called me and he said, we cannot go ahead with this second step, devaluation. I had to instruct the governor of the Reserve Bank because I couldn't disobey the Prime Minister, and I rang up Dr. Rangarajan, who was the Deputy Governor in charge of foreign exchange. I told him the Prime Minister wants that we should not have the second stage devaluation. But Rangarajan told me, whatever you may say, I have shot the bolt, I have already announced the raid. So this was a case of a country being helped even when it didn't want to help itself. So these are all incidents of life, my dealings with politicians. I have enjoyed working with all the important dignitaries. I worked very closely with Morarji Bhai. I worked very closely with Chaudhry Charan Singh, and also later on with Chandrasekhar ji. In fact, Chandrasekhar ji called me from Geneva that I should come back and take over as the economic advisor to the Prime Minister. I came back, and for some months I was both the chairman of the University Grants Commission as well as the advisor to the Prime Minister. But there was no serious dialogue in those turbulent times about economic policy making because the country was in political turmoil. So the reform agenda had to wait till a more stable government came, which happened when Narasimha Rao ji became the Prime Minister, and we were able to implement a reform program which has changed the fortunes of the country. But even there were problems. Although Narasimha Rao ji gave me full support, when it came to the approval of the industrial licensing policy, industrial policy, there was strong opposition in the cabinet. Important members of the cabinet were opposed to it, and Narasimha Rao ji turned to me and said, "What have you to say?" And I started by saying, "Mr. Prime Minister, we are doing nothing new. It is all there in the agenda for the government, written by no less a person than Rajiv Gandhi. So we are implementing what Rajiv Gandhi had always intended if he came back as the Prime Minister." And as we came out, Arjun Singh ji called me and he said, You seem to have studied our election manifesto much more carefully than we have done. So, despite serious objections about the industrial policy, the cabinet approved the draft. Jairam was asked to write what would be useful phraseology, but in Parliament there was serious doubts about wisdom of what we were doing. And when the matter came before the parliamentary committee, Congress Parliamentary Party, there was a very strong opposition. And there were two persons who stood to support me. One was Manishankar Iyer, then the other was Nathuram Mirdaji. Nathuram Mirdaji said, gentlemen, you may be opposing this thing, but you will regret it if you do not go the path that Manmohan Singh has suggested. So I am very grateful to Manishankar Iyer for the two-member team that saved the reform process. So life has been a smooth sailing, but there were many hiccups in the path and some good luck, but a lot of hard work. And as finance minister, I used to meet the gentlemen and ladies of the press regularly. I had very good relation, and by and large, the country followed what we had presented as the remedy for the crisis of '91.
Given that 91 really turned out to be a turning point for the economy of a kind that we couldn't have imagined, the lesson here is we need accidental finance ministers to do this kind of a magical turning around that India really did. Dr. Singh, as the last thing, I would like to have you speculate a little bit about India's future. What do you expect? Where are we headed to? On the economy? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Are we at another juncture where we need major decisions? Just your thoughts.
Well, I have always been reminded of a couplet from Iqbal about the future of our country, which Mr. P.N. Aksar used to narrate to me very often whenever we were in difficulties. And that couplet is something like this. मिट गए मिस्र यूनान और रोमा लेकिन कायम है अब तक नामो निशान हमारा कुछ बात है कि हस्ती मिटती नहीं हमारी सदियों रहा है दुश्मन दौरे ज़मां हमारा. So, despite all the hiccups, hurdles, I have no doubt that India will get its action right, that despite the difficulties that may be on the horizon, this country is destined to be a major powerhouse of the global economy. That's what I had stated in my first budget speech. I said, quoting Victor Hugo, no power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. And I said, I suggest to this august house that now is the time, and I believe that there will be, that no power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come, and the emergence of India as a major global power is one such idea whose time has come. Therefore, I have always believed at a time when India was in very severe crisis that we will overcome, we will prevail, and with determination, I think we convert the crisis of '91 into a great opportunity to reform the economy, and the results are there for everyone to see. There have been several changes of government, but basically the broad thrust of economic policy has not changed in the last 25 years. And the result is that India is one of the few countries for 25 years, it has an average growth rate of 6.7 to 7%. We could do more, and we shall do more. I sincerely hope and believe that India is destined to achieve its destiny. That's my belief. It was a belief which sustained me as a bureaucrat, as a finance minister, and as prime minister. And I stand by that India is destined to be a major powerhouse of the global economy.
It's time to, this is drawing to a close, but I do want to tell you from my personal account one little episode with Dr. Singh, which told me about the kind of person he is. Just after I joined government, Oxford University Press was publishing a collection of my earlier writings. In that, there was one particular piece written about Dr. Singh much before he was active in Indian politics, before he was finance minister. He had come to our home in East Delhi and had my mother was there, he may not even remember. And my mother was just taken in by the humility of the person. He was already very distinguished, and the conversation. I had written a newspaper piece just praising him. And at that time, he was not a politician, so one could write very freely. I was in government, I was publishing my collection, and I thought, since I'm in government, working in his government, maybe I should do, I'm publishing his paper, send it to him. It's all full of praise about him. And he's a politician, he's going to say yes immediately, and Oxford University Press will publish it. Few days later, a response came saying that it would be too embarrassing for me if you publish this. So no one has seen that piece of mine, which was an early piece that I had written about him. So on that note, this is a personal note, Dr. Singh, that I feel the country appreciates and will appreciate even more the huge contribution, the absolutely huge contribution that you have made to India. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kaushik. But last but not least, I should mention that these volumes have taken this shape because of the tremendous encouragement and support I have received from my three daughters, Daman, Upinder, Amrit. But for their enthusiasm and but for their persistence, I think these volumes would never have been seen the light of the day. People say I was a silent prime minister. I think these volumes speak for themselves, and I don't want to boast about my goals or my achievements as the prime minister, but the events that took place are well described in these volumes, particularly the volume which deals with the Prime Minister speaks. I certainly would like to say that I was not the Prime Minister who was afraid of talking to the press. I met the press regularly, and on every foreign trip that I undertook, I had a press conference on return in the plane or immediately after landing. So there is a large number of those press conferences whose results are also described. And I remember very vividly in 2005 when I went to Washington, the National Press Club invited me to address. Our officials were nervous that I would not be able to manage the National Press Club, but that was a very successful conference, and that conference, its verbatim record is published in these volumes. That will give you an idea of what I was able to achieve in dealing with ladies and gentlemen of the press.
Thank you, Dr. Singh and Professor Basu, for such a rich and engaging conversation, and also for punctuating it with witty anecdotes. May I now request Dr. Sugata Ghosh. He is the Director of Academic Publishing at Oxford University Press, India, and I now request him to share with us a vote of thanks.
So Changing India by Dr. Manmohan Singh is a capstone of remarkable career and a substantive reminder of Dr. Singh's unusual blend of academic rigor, intellectual prowess, and diplomatic experience. And we hope that this work will make a critical intervention in these difficult times in our understanding of the economic and socio-political history of the subcontinent. On behalf of Oxford University Press, we are delighted that so many of you have taken time out of your busy schedules on a Tuesday evening to join us today here. Thank you so much, Professor Basu, for as usual you have been a part of the family, but coming down to Delhi for this event in honor of Dr. Singh only made us so happy about it. I would like to also express our heartfelt gratitude to the editors of the volume, Dr. C. Rankarajan, Professor K. Sundaram, Lord Nicholas Stern in absentia, Mr. Santanu Singh, and Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee. Without your direct intervention, this would not have been possible. Two people, and I'm so happy Dr. Singh mentioned them, without whom this set would not have seen the light of the day, and as equally as the editors of the press worked. Dear Rupinder, dear Daman, thank you so much for what you have done with this. And last but not the least, thank you, Dr. Manmohan Singh, and thank you, Ma'am Gurcharan Kaur, for always being there. Have a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you.